Yes, the coming seminar will be about the nature of archetypes, how to identify them within yourself, and how to work with them. So what is an archetype, and why are they relevant to us? The word archetype comes from the Greek word archos, which means primal or first cause, quite literally. And this word archetype refers to, we could call it a kind of architectural design or blueprint on which we build various activities and experiences. Or in this case, it would be a building. So an archetype represents a living thought pattern in our psyche that brings us structure and gives us meaning in life. It's a universal thought pattern. The great Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung was studying at a time universal symbols, mythologies, stories, fairy tales, art. He was also studying the dreams of his patients, and he observed similar patterns in the dreams as in these great stories of mythology and literature and art. Similarities that led him to the belief or the idea that not only do we perhaps have physical organs that are reproducible, you know, everyone has a heart, everyone has a stomach, but we have psychic organs as well. So he was able to identify a number of archetypes by which we live our lives and give our lives structure and meaning. A lot of development and thought has gone into archetypal psychology since Jung, and people have continued to identify various archetypes that exist. One very large archetype that is at work in the collective mind, because all archetypes are part of the collective mind, is a kind of thought pattern that repeats itself at the great turning of the ages in history. It existed at the time of Christ, at the turning of the ages from Aries to Pisces, before from the turning of Aries to Taurus, or Taurus to Aries, and at this time in history now, at the turning of Pisces to Aquarius. It's as if evolution begins to create a new blueprint, a new architectural design to bring new evolution to our psyches, our values, and our way of living. And we can observe this in our society now. We call this archetype the archetype of the apocalypse. Now the word apocalypse means that which is hidden or secret, that reveals itself or shows itself. And it represents the new development of a new cycle of activity and growth. But as we all experience in our lives when we move, for example, from childhood to adolescence or adolescence to adulthood, everything is changing, even physically for us. And each cycle of our life brings its gifts and its new understanding and new structure. So this archetype we speak of, the apocalypse, is no different to the collective of society. So in this case, it goes through 4 stages in its development. And we go through 4 stages, very similar in our personal development as we change in our life cycles. The first step is the coming of a light or a new energy. It's like the birth of something. Everything is alive, everything is magical in a sense, full of hope, full of promise. And it's then followed by a second stage, which is called judgment, or a period of evaluation, reevaluation. When we as human beings, either as humanity or as individuals, are faced with actually letting go of things that don't work for us any longer. Old paradigms, old beliefs, old ways of reacting emotionally and behaviorally. You know, in your personal life, a very obvious and, stark change of this kind would be going from childhood, the magic, the comforts, the security of childhood, to adolescence. It's like a death and a rebirth. Well, in this case, we speak of judgment or reassessment as a process of recognizing everything that is not working, and this is a phase of breakdown, just as we have in our society now. So this process of breaking down may look on the surface as being a judgment from God or a bad sign or something dark happening in our lives. And why? Christ gave a parable that relates to this. It's a parable that is about you can't wear a new energy in an old coat, so to speak. You have to eliminate what cannot carry this new vibration, this new life, and bring something different to it. A new body, a new structure, a new building, a new view on life. And this process leads to the third stage, which is the letting go, the elimination of the old. There's first, new energy arrives. The new energy is such that it causes the breakdown of the old, second stage. The second stage then leads to the elimination of the old, and the fourth stage is the new energy, the new structure, the new life. So, in a way, we can say that behind the creation of these archetypes, these new ideas, these divine ideas, we could also call them divine ideas, divine thought patterns, behind it is the divine intelligence creating that plan, creating that evolution. We call that the Holy Spirit. Now, in our individual lives, the archetypes work in a similar way. But as children growing up in our family systems, sometimes we develop a wounded relationship to the archetypes within us. And the result is 3 different ways of expressing this wounding in our lives. We develop an identification with 3 different storylines. Because archetypes always create storylines. That's perhaps even the best way to identify the archetype and its level of health within you is, what is your story? The 3 storylines are the victim, the abuser, and the rescuer. So the storyline of the victim would be something like this out of an American movie many years ago, a taxi cab driver, and this man asked him, so what do you think the meaning of life is? And the taxi cab driver in a heavy New York accent says, you're born, you suffer, you die, get used to it. This is the victim storyline. This storyline reflects a disconnection from the power of this archetypal evolutionary energy. The victim will reflect the qualities of helplessness and fear and suffering and immobility, apathy, these kinds of qualities. And a victim is in need of someone to victimize them, so the second storyline is abuser. And the abuser storyline goes through something like, I'm disappointed in authority, in God, in life, I'm taking charge, I'm God now. Yeah? Then there's a third storyline we call the rescuer. In the case of the rescuer, it's the line of, I can't handle observing all this suffering in the world, I have to change it and do something about it. So I rescue the victim, I fight the aggressor, I eventually become the hero, and I have a special place in God's home. So to review, the victim storyline is a disconnection, a deflated relationship to this archetypal energy of the Holy Spirit. The aggressor or abuser is a inflated relationship to this energy. I am that. I had a patient once when I was starting my psychiatric practice in the hospital, and he was running around one day ordering everyone around, you know, shouting and ordering, and I went to him and I asked him, what are you doing this for? He says, I have a secret to tell you. I said, okay, what is it? I am Napoleon Bonaparte. Yes, a position of self-importance, but not in a very friendly way, more with control, more with force, more with aggression. And the third position, the rescuer, is what we would call an inflated, positive relationship to the archetype. I'm good, therefore I am God. I am self-important and everyone needs me, and what would they do without me? All three of these stories, or even combinations of them, can dominate people for their whole lifetimes. Because when one is wounded in one's relationship to the archetypal energy, one will continue to run the same storyline again and again in one's life. When one has a healthy connection to the archetype, the Holy Spirit guides one in learning, teaching you how to create and how to survive and how to bring more into your life, more love, more wisdom, more understanding. So let's talk briefly about the 7 major archetypes through which we live our lives and through which we create meaning in our lives. The first we'll begin with is called the natural self. This is an archetypal energy that helps guide us in living a better physical life. It supports our development in areas of health, finances, home, how we live, and our relationship to nature. A story I recall in the moment about a healthy expression of this archetype. And it is a true story. There was a man during pre-World War I that was walking through a very remote area of France, hiking. And he came to an area that was deforested. There was less vegetation. It had been an area where there had been mining and the soil was poor and there was very little rain. As he had been walking for several days, he came upon an unusual sight, a cabin and a man living there. And he went to the man, and the man greeted him in a friendly manner. And this man that was hiking, a journalist, asked, "What are you doing here?" And the man said, "I'm living here with nature, and I plant seeds every day." So the journalist was curious. I find somebody out in nowhere planting seeds. What kind of life is this? Is the man not well or mentally sane? So the man said, "Every day I find 100 good acorn seeds." It's a tree. We call them acorns, these seeds. I think it's an oak tree, yeah? Oh. And I plant them. That is my life. And the journalist was quite amazed by this, that this man would have such a great patience and such a great love for nature, that he would be here living alone and so self-sufficient. So the journalist went away. He had his hike. He thanked the man for his time. And then many years went by. And he decided after World War I, after some time, to return to this area out of curiosity and on a vacation once again, to relax. And he did, and where he had first found, the first time, this area that had been arid and without water and rain and foliage, he found a whole forest thriving. Rivers, streams were flowing, plants and foliage were growing, and animal life had returned to the area. And he called this man the acorn planter. And this man exhibited and exhibits a great wisdom on his relationship to nature, his understanding of self-sufficiency, and his trust in the Holy Spirit to grow everything once it's allowed to grow. The same principle of this natural one applies to our physical bodies when our bodies get ill. If we care for our bodies, if we give our bodies the right nutrients and the right healing energy, our body will heal, because that is the will of the Holy Spirit. That's the work of the natural archetype. The second archetype that we'll talk about is what we call the emotional one, or the lover. Now, this archetype provides us with passion, inspiration, creativity, enthusiasm for life. It also provides us the opportunity to bond emotionally in intimate ways with other human beings. It helps us cultivate and develop devotion and commitment. There's a story about this archetype that I want to share. It's a myth called the story of Ariadne and Theseus. So in this story, Theseus is the bastard son of a king of Athens, and he wants to claim his position with the king because there is no higher to the throne. There's no one that can take the throne. So when he goes and reveals his identity, he is chosen to go with 13 youth, or it's actually, no, 14 youth, young people, to fight a very monstrous creature in Crete called the Minotaur. The story is that King Minos of Crete had this beast that was part animal, part human, but it was devouring people and things, and it was living in a labyrinth, and no one had ever achieved killing it. There was an agreement between Athens and Crete that they would send every so many years 14 virgin boys and girls to attempt to kill the Minotaur. This was part of the agreement so there would not be war between the two city-states. So Theseus was going to be in this group. He went to a prophetess because he wanted to find out how he could grow stronger and braver and mightier and more aggressive so he could kill this Minotaur. The prophetess said to him, "Go see Aphrodite, she can help you." Theseus, Aphrodite, goddess of love? I'm for sure will be killed now. And in ancient mythology, Aphrodite would be an example from mythology of the lover archetype. And the same way as for the natural self, it would be Artemis or Diana, goddess of the woodlands. So Theseus goes to Aphrodite, and Aphrodite puts a love spell on him. So he goes to Crete, and as he approaches, stepping into the labyrinth, his sword and his bravery and heart, his brave heart, at the very last moment, but in time, his eyes catch the eyes of Ariadne, the king's daughter, King Minos' daughter. And as their eyes touch, it is love at first sight. Aphrodite's spell is at work. So in her passion and enthusiasm, Ariadne says, "I will not lose this man, I want him." So she gives him secretly a golden thread that she holds the spool to, and he can go into the labyrinth and not be lost, and then he will find his way out once he kills the Minotaur. And he comes out the hero. But if it wasn't for the love spell, he probably wouldn't have made it. So this golden thread is this thread of devotion and commitment that carried him through an emotional drive. I'm going to eventually be the hero and I'll be back in her arms. The same thing happens to all of us when we fall in love with an idea or a vision for our lives, and we follow it till we reach it, through the labyrinth of all the challenges and eventually out. The third archetype we call the warrior archetype. The warrior archetype allows us to develop discipline, perseverance, and a feeling of duty to what we are trying to build in our lives. It helps us build something in our lives. The warrior also helps us create our emotional boundaries, our psychic boundaries, and to respect the boundaries of others as well. And of course, an example of the warrior archetype from mythology, the classic, is the Hercules, the great warrior, half god, half man, with his 12 labors trying to reach his divinity again and be the hero. All forms of the hero archetype or the warrior archetype have a kind of heroic task and success of victory over something, over their dark force, over their own weaknesses. So one story about this archetype, and a noble version of this archetype, was that of a samurai warrior. There was a king that lived in some place in Asia, and in his kingdom was a thief creating havoc, stealing, killing innocent people. And this king decided to send a samurai warrior, one of his warriors, out to capture and kill the thief. And so this king decided to choose his most noble and trusted warrior. And he sent this warrior out, and true to form, the warrior found the thief and prepared to kill him. Being a very clever thief, having gotten away with things for years in the kingdom, the thief somehow insulted the warrior personally before he was killed. And in that moment, the warrior said to the thief, "You are very clever. I cannot kill you because you have offended me personally and made me angry. This is not my duty to my king. I would kill you out of my personal anger, not out of my duty to my king." So the warrior went back and went to the king and told him what had happened, expecting that perhaps the king would somehow criticize him for not doing it. But the king looked at the warrior and said, "That's why you're my best warrior. You follow my way." And in essence, that is the true warrior. It's a warrior that acts out of duty and out of necessity, but not out of personal motivation, not out of frustration or anger or really helplessness. The king then said, "Well, I'll just send one of my less honorable warriors out to do the job." And he did, and it happened, of course. The fourth archetype we call the king or queen. This archetype is the organizing principle in our psyche. It gives us the capacity for leadership, to organize our own lives, to act responsibly and ethically, to, in a way, in a sense, treat all the other archetypal energies and educate them in love. A good example of this archetype are all the numerous stories from the Bible from Jesus Christ. He helped educate and brought healing and compassion to the tax collectors, to the prostitutes, to those warriors that had wounded others and misunderstood anger and love, and so on and so on. In many ways, he was a master healer, and this leadership he exemplified is this love of the heart, this love of the heart in its strength. It's interesting that in the older days, in monarchies, that originally the idea of a king or queen was someone who was ruling through God's rule, not their personal rule. And they represented the fairness and justice of spirit, or the higher laws of life, and the ability to teach them and to bring fairness to everyone. The fifth archetype we call the magician. The magician brings us the ability to communicate, to listen, and to be creative in our speech. A good example of this archetype from Greek mythology is the god Hermes, or a messenger god, who could communicate messages, but oftentimes could change his form and appear differently so that the people would hear him and understand him. American Indians also have such a figure, a magician figure called a coyote, the coyote. And there are many, many Sufi stories from the mystical sect of Islam that glorify this archetype in a very positive way. What we would call crazy wisdom. One such story that comes to mind comes from a series of stories about a person who has crazy wisdom named Mullah Nasruddin. And in this story, one day, Mullah Nasruddin has lost the keys to his house. And he's on his hands and knees in the yard looking for the keys, acting very distressed. "Oh, I can't find my keys. I lost my keys. Where are my keys?" And two concerned gentlemen come by and they stop and say, "What's the problem?" "Well, I lost my keys." "Well, we'll try to help you find the keys." "Where did you..." They start looking and looking, but they're not finding the key. They said, "Well, where do you last remember seeing your key?" "Oh, over there by the house." And the two men say, "Well, so why are you looking for the keys here?" And Mullah Nasruddin says, "Because the light is much brighter here." So this is the crazy wisdom of the magician archetype, how it works with us. And I have a personal story with this that I often tell. I once was asking the question in my prayers and my meditations, I really want to change my workplace. I don't like where I'm working. I was in a clinic where it was very stressful. And of course I was debating this for a long time, like we always, before taking a step, we're debating and thinking this way, that way, with our minds. Not realizing at the time that all I needed to do was let go of my fear and I would have my answer and take action. I was worried there might not be enough financially if I went out on my own. This is what I wanted to do, to have my own practice and clinic. So one day, going to work near the actual clinic, I saw a little animal we call a turtle trying to cross the road. And it was sitting right in the middle of the road, between one side and the other, just like my mind was. At the time, I couldn't see that. Sometimes we're not able to see the obvious. So I stopped the car, and with an anxiety in my heart, I went and took the turtle and put it to the other side. 2 weeks later, I was on a bigger road, outside of the small road where the clinic was, but this was a larger road. This time, there was another turtle. It was also sitting in the meridian between the lanes, 2 lanes there, 2 lanes here, with faster cars moving. Once again, the anxiety comes to me. I don't want this turtle hurt. I want to help him safely cross the road. I stop the car near, just in a neighborhood close by. I get out. When the cars have started to slow down, I run out, take the turtle, and eventually cross the road and put it on the other side. At this point, I'm beginning to wonder what is going on. I've always heard if something happens 3 times in a row, you better listen and get what it's about. So about a month went by, still debating. My mind, my turtle, is still in the center of my road, but I still don't see it. And I decided to go off for a weekend to not only enjoy myself at a retreat center in nature, but also to think about this issue, to make a decision. So I'm walking down this road, and again, thinking. Quite suddenly, a dog comes up near me that must have been owned by a neighbor close by. It's a breed we call a golden retriever. Beautiful dog, golden, spiritual color. It keeps following me. I keep walking and I keep thinking. And the dog is looking at me and walking and looking at me and walking. And the dog runs into the woods. I hear the dog with its paws thrashing about, and I'm saying, what's happened to my friend? He's busy, maybe he's trying to catch an animal or something. And the dog comes out of the forest, and he has a turtle in his mouth, and he puts it right at my feet in the middle of the path. And in that moment, I look down and I say, oh my God. And I realize that God is dog in English, spelled backwards. I suddenly understood. I am the turtle. I need to move faster, and the only person that can take me across is myself. Sure enough, I decided, I put in my resignation almost immediately, and I left, and not so long after that the clinic had to close because of financial problems, but I was now in my new work and practice. So this archetype will often speak to us and use whatever it needs to get the message to us. This is the divine messenger, Hermes, if you will. So the 6th archetype we sometimes refer to as the visionary or the prophet. And this archetype gives us the capacity to understand more deeply, to see clearly, to be more objective. It also helps us dream about our future and envision our future in a more positive way. You know? One good example of this archetype is from modern times. I think of the Star Wars, this very famous little Jedi master named Yoda. A good example of this is a story from the very first first Star Wars movie that came out in the 80s. Yoda is training this young potential Jedi Knight named Luke Skywalker, right? And of course, Yoda has many abilities and powers. He can lift objects, which Luke can't do yet because he doesn't know how to master the Force. And Yoda is only 900 years old, but he looks a little bit like a tree and a leprechaun put together. Right? But Yoda understands, has a great wisdom. And even though he's teaching Luke to do many things, what we might call paranormal activities, and, you know, very great sort of almost kung fu acts and so on. At one point he says, yes, and now you are ready to face your greatest enemy. And so Luke Skywalker walks into this dark area with its kind of a jungle, swampy area. He hears this noise and he hears this Jedi sword humming, and somebody has it, and he comes face to face with his enemy. The greatest enemy, it turns out to be himself. He has to fight himself. This is the great wisdom of the visionary, to show the truth, to show what is. So the visionary gives us this capacity for vision and for predicting the future and creating the future and giving us a good GPS system to find our way. And this archetype was very common and popular in ancient times and is even today in the form of the clairvoyant, the medium that reads an energy, that sees the future, that can advise wisely someone coming to them for help. And there were some great centers in ancient time where these prophetesses would be. One was the great ancient center of Delphi in Greece. So the seventh archetype we can call the elder or the wise one. One could say the visionary and the elder have similarities. As we spoke of Yoda, Yoda could also qualify as an elder. But maybe a good example of an elder would be an angel or an archangel, one that has a great wisdom and uses their wisdom only for good. Daskalos, the Cypriot mystic, gave a good example, I think, of the wisdom of the Holy Spirit, in this case, and the archangels, and the impersonal nature of wisdom and love as it operates in life. So in the story, there were two men, and they were on the road, and they got into an argument, had a fight, and both were wounded and were sent to the hospital. One was considered a good man in his community, had never done anything wrong. The other was considered a thief and a criminal. So Daskalos would ask which one was healed of his wounds that he sustained when there was the fight. Often people, students, would say, oh, the good one, not the bad one. But Daskalos would respond that they were both healed of their wounds, that the Holy Spirit has the wisdom to sustain our bodies and do the will of God in order for the soul to have its experiences it needs in order to learn and grow, regardless of its behavior. And that this is an expression of the wisdom of the Holy Spirit and the impersonal love or divine love of the Holy Spirit. So what benefits would you get from coming to a course on archetypes as I've outlined? There are several. One is to identify your storyline and how you are controlled by it, whether you are taking the storyline of the rescuer, victim, or abuser, or all of the above. Another thing is we are teaching methods in order to learn how to work with the archetypes to evolve your relationship to them and form a stronger relationship to them in a positive way. You will be able to identify the major archetypes in yourself as they work, and that in your family members and friends, and hopefully be able to utilize this information to support others in their healing. And how to work with archetypes in your relationships as well. And also to understand the collective influences at this time that you are under in this process of the 4 stages of the new developments of this new age we live in, to help you regain a connection to this all-present power in yourself of the Holy Spirit and the archangels that work with each of these archetypes. So thank you, everybody.